One of the questions, or one of the comments I often get under the videos I do is, isn't this out of our hands, out of our control, because the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset, they're going to come in and take all the decisions about globalization and the economy and mass immigration out of our hands, and we'll just be stuck with it. We'll have to live with it forever. And when I hear that, I feel a Shakespeare quote coming on from Julius Caesar, and that is, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings." And I think that's the case here. What I mean by that is the World Economic Forum and its Great Reset drivel, if it gets anywhere, it's going to be because the politicians that we elect and re-elect and keep re-electing will jump at the opportunity to be able to rule us more easily by being able to rule us behind our backs via an organisation like the World Economic Forum. And because ruling us more easily increases their power. The only aim of a power addict is to get more power, and the job of someone with power is to get more power. And the reason I think that's going to happen is because that's what happened with the EU. That's the model, that's the example, that's the evidence I use here. If you look at the EU was not a super state or a Brussels dictatorship. It wasn't even, I don't think it was even about economic and political cooperation. It certainly wasn't necessary to have an organisation of that size for political and economic cooperation. It was simply a scam to enable our prime ministers and presidents around Europe to rule us behind our backs, to rule us more easily via an institution that we weren't paying attention to. A bit like a burglar doesn't knock on your front door, he gets tired of knocking on your front door, so he goes in the back window, goes in the side window, sneaks in when you're not looking, does a distraction burglary. And I think it will be, the WEF will be the same. Now, if you want to pass legislation in the UK, it is one hell of a battle. If you're the Prime Minister or a Secretary of State, you have got a long, hard road with a storm of criticism at every stage. The first stage, you've got to float the idea, you've got to leak it to a newspaper, see what the comments are like, get a storm of protest. Make a policy proposal, get a storm of protest. Issue a green paper, get a storm of protest. Then issue a white paper, then publish a bill, then have a first reading in the House of Commons on the bill, then have the second reading, then it goes to committee stage, and then it goes to the report stage, then you get the third reading, then you get the vote, then it goes to the House of Lords, and then you get the vote in the House of Lords, and finally you get royal assent. At every stage you are held to account in the papers, on the telly, online, in the debate shows, because people follow it, people follow what is going on in their national parliaments. People didn't follow what was going on within the EU. And then if it goes wrong, if you get that legislation passed and it turns out to be a disaster, it's hung around your neck, you've got responsibility for it, you then have to go through the whole process again just to repeal it. So it's much easier, it was much easier going via the EU, getting that legislation passed quietly, and then if it went wrong, all you do is you blame the EU. You don't say, gosh, I made a mistake there. You push it through the EU, you make sure it's voted for, and then at the end of it you can just get up, and because no one was paying attention, you can say, oh, that EU, isn't it terrible? We're going to have to look really hard at the EU sometime. Tony Blair was a master of that. He loved the EU, he still does. It's the one thing he keeps campaigning for, partly also because he wants to suck up to European leaders in the hope that international leaders will give him the big job he craves. But when it went wrong, he would trash the EU. It's a good way of saying this failure of legislation is nothing to do with me. That makes it a lot easier to rule. That really ramps up the power that national leaders have. It makes it a lot easier job for them. Because what it means is the legislation chamber within the EU, it's not the European Parliament, it's not the Council of the European Union where the heads of state get together and vote. It is the little gathering of heads of state around Frau Merkel's minibar at the swanky hotel where they're having their latest bun fight. So Boris Johnson says, I want taxes on fish, and Merkel says, I want taxes on jeans, and Macron says, I want taxes on caramel, and they all say, yeah, that's the deal. Okay, now let's go and get drunk. And it is really easy. They like each other, much more than they like you. They find it a lot easier dealing with each other than they find it dealing with you. That they like it. They're more concerned about each other's interests than they are about your interests. So it gives them a lot more power in getting legislation. They don't have to ram the legislation through. It's about discussing it with their mates. The EU removes all of those problems of legislation, and it means you can be ruled behind your back. And if you look at how the EU is run, you'll see that every legislative institution, there are basically 4 institutions that are involved one way or another with legislation. They're all controlled by national state politicians. The first one, and it's pretty impenetrable, it's boring stuff, no one pays any attention. Firstly, you have the European Council. That's made up of heads of state, and its job is to set direction and policy. And the president is chosen by state leaders, and the prime ministers and presidents keep a tight control on the general lines of policy that it sets. So that's the European Council. Just to confuse you, the next body is the Council of the European Union, otherwise known as the Council or the Council of Europe. Again, this is deliberately tedious and convoluted. It's meant to confuse. It's meant to, the more impenetrable the better, so ordinary people don't pay attention. And the Council of the European Union, that's the one that adopts the laws. That's the one that rubber stamps, votes on the laws. And its members and its president, again, are chosen by state leaders. And so in that way, the presidents and prime ministers of Europe keep another tight grip on the EU. They're the ones who say, yes, that legislation passes. Then you have the European Commission, which is a weird kind of civil service. It basically writes the legislation, then it pushes the legislation. When the legislation goes through, it then enforces it. A really strange kind of civil service. But again, the president of the European Commission and all of the commissioners are chosen by state leaders, by the presidents and the prime ministers, who once again, that enables them to keep a tight grip on what goes on within the European Union. Now, the European Parliament, you might think, well, that's directly elected, maybe that's some competition, that takes power away from the heads of state. It took decades and decades for the European Parliament to get any status, and it was only really over decades that the heads of state realised that the European Parliament was no threat. It would always agree. It is a tame body of time servers. It's not really a serious democratic institution. There is no competitive democracy or democratic accountability there, mainly because the same old faces show up year after year, decade after decade, because proportional representation is so strong. What it means is just a few MEPs fall off either end according to whichever swing that there is come election time. But most of them just carry on year after year, term after term. And they do not oppose, they know better than to oppose what state leaders do. They're on a cushy number, and they're not going to rock the boat. Occasionally, if they do disagree, if there is a disagreement between the Parliament and the Council, then what you will get is a reconciliation procedure. It's just a tin pot mediation procedure that gets them to agree. It always works. They always end up agreeing. There's never been a deadlock between the European Parliament and the heads of state. There's never going to be. So the heads of state, the prime ministers and presidents of Europe, know they can use the EU to pass any legislation they want. That is a lot easier for them, and it gives them a lot more power over us, which is what they want. I think that is the motor, that is the motivation behind the EU. I think that same motivation, that same motor will be running if heads of state around the world think they're going to adopt the World Economic Forum. Two possible differences are, one, that it might be a convenient way to gang up in order to get big companies, particularly big tech, to do the bidding of governments. So censorship. Governments don't want to be seen to be censoring, but if they can get big tech to do it whilst talking all in favour of free speech, that looks good for them. They can say, well, that's Google censoring you, that's Facebook censoring you, nothing to do with me. But if the WEF, I think that would prove useful to governments. Say the government of France probably doesn't have the power to go to Google and say, we want you to censor. But if all the Western governments team up and then they all go to Google and say, we want you to censor, Google's going to do it. Google will do it before it's asked in those circumstances. So I think that's one difference. Another difference is that with all the money Another difference is a banking issue. With all the money that's getting stuffed into the economy, that may risk inflation, particularly if governments want to keep interest rates low, which they do, because they've got so much debt, they can't increase interest rates, otherwise they'll go broke. But if you have all that money going into economy and into the economy and interest rates staying low, then inflation might come. Now, some economists, particularly a fellow called Russell Napier, who I think is a really good economist, I'll leave a link below to an article that he wrote. Some say that what governments are then going to have to resort to if inflation looks like it might become a problem is regulating the loans that banks are able to make. So instead of regulating that by setting interest rates, they'll keep interest rates low, but they will intervene and say to banks, you can make that loan to that company, you can't make that loan to that company, on the basis of keeping inflation low. But it has the added benefit of favouritism, basically giving financial rewards to governments, to businesses that they like, which then means that governments will compete to be liked, so that businesses will compete to be liked by governments. So that's, and I could see the World Economic Forum being a useful body to launder that kind of bent business. So now the World Economic Forum, what is it? It's basically a great big junket, a beanfest, a networking organisation between big businesses. They're the ones who pay its costs, pay its expenses. It meets in Switzerland. It's about $300,000 for an industry partner to join every year. So a company, a business that wants to join, that's what you cough up, 300 grand. To be a strategic partner, i.e. a big business, that's 600 grand a year. That's a lot of money. This is for big business. If you just want to turn up, buy a ticket, turn up, sit there like a lemon and listen, they're going to charge you 19,000 bucks for that. So it's a backslapping networking event for big business people to feel good about themselves and feel they've arrived and cut deals. Okay, if you're a big businessman, that's the place for you. Now, the Great Reset was set out, that's best summarised in an article that was written by a fellow called Klaus Schwab, the businessman who started the World Economic Forum. And I'll leave a link to this article. It's called "Now is the Time for a Great Reset." And it is a total load of opportunistic, power-grabbing cobblers, a load of nice words. Creepy stuff, but it's drivel, bilge, piffle, but meant to sound nice. And this is why I think the problem lies in us, because it is exploiting our own decadence. And what I mean by decadence, the problem that we have is that for so long we have relied on, we've become so reliant on the state to provide for us, to manage the economy, to sort out any problem. If there is a problem with the economy, if there is a pressing, a really difficult need that we have, a difficult problem, we expect government to sort it out, that the state can, should and will sort it out for us. And we have come to think that that is the natural state of affairs. It is not the natural state of affairs, but we've come to think that it is. And as a result of that, we think that the only thing that can prevent permanent justice, fairness, prosperity and plenty for all of us is if a politician has bad intentions, if he's a bad guy and he doesn't mean well. Often people used to say this endlessly about George W. Bush. He was just a bad guy preventing life being perfect as it was meant to be. And if only we could vote for that nice Mr. Obama or that nice Mr. Biden, they would sort it out because they've got good intentions. And I know they have good intentions because he did a speech where he talked about his good intentions and it had a lot of nice words. So that is what happens. If you think that it is in the nature of reality for someone else to come along and provide for you, you're going to develop that dependent, I think decadent, but certainly very easily manipulated mindset. A mindset that can be manipulated by statements of goodwill. And what you have with the Great Reset is one great big bucket load, a great big barrow load of statements of goodwill. Now what Klaus Schwab says in this article is there are three aims to the Great Reset. The first, he says, is to steer the market toward fairer outcomes. Well, fairer outcomes? No, I want unfairer outcomes. Nobody's going to disagree with that. Through tax, regulatory and fiscal policy. Well, who cares about those things? I just like the nice fair outcomes. Maybe that'll mean a bit more freebies, a bit more free stuff for me. And a stakeholder economy. Oh, maybe I'm a stakeholder. Maybe I'll get a bit more money out of the economy. It is nice talk, doesn't mean anything. The second one is making sure that investments advance shared goals. Well, okay. I mean, who's going to disagree with that? Through building green urban infrastructure and creating incentives for industries to improve their track record on environmental, social and governance metrics, whatever that means. Well, the only thing, all it means is something that you can't disagree with, because you're not going to say, no, I want them to have a worse track record on environmental, social and governance metrics. So again, a load of word salad that no one's going to disagree with. And the third one, number 3, is about harnessing the innovations of the fourth industrial revolution to support the public good. Oh no, I'm not in favour of the public good. I want the public to suffer. I mean, the fourth industrial revolution, that is basically about automation and artificial intelligence, and the WEF thinks it's going to shape how that affects our lives. Okay, and so yeah, we're not going to disagree with that. And what the other thing that they say is that the coronavirus, the COVID crisis, represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine and reset our world to create a healthier, more equitable and more prosperous future. Again, who is going to disagree with a healthy, equitable and prosperous future? I mean, it's creepy that people are sometimes kind of shocked that they're using the coronavirus death toll as a way to as an opportunity to get in, but that's the purpose of what they're doing. It is opportunistic. They want to appeal, they want to seem nice to us, and that gives state leaders the opportunity to, or the excuse to go and then use the WEF as some kind of backdoor way to govern us, to legislate and to rule us, which makes it easier for us. Now you can really see what a load of drivel and bilge it is, what a load of opportunistic cobblers it is. If you click the link and look at that Klaus Schwab article, there's a lovely image they've done showing what their intentions are. It's in the shape of a circle with a lot of nice words like coming out of that, like spokes coming out of that circle, and inside you've got 6 headings that they're supposedly grouped under. I would love to have been a fly on the wall when that graphic was getting produced and there was a whiteboard and they were deciding what words they should use. Because those words, a lot of them, it's a bit like if you went to your 6-year-old daughter and said, what nice things do you think the Prime Minister should do? And she'd say, well, I think they should be nice to the environment. I think they should make everything fair. I think they should make us all richer, all more prosperous. So that's a kind of, and it's all just nice words like that, all grouped under various headings like restoring the health of the environment. Okay, what a nice heading. Or developing sustainable business models. Who's going to say, no, I want unsustainable business models? Or strengthening regional development. No, I want to weaken regional. No one's going to say they want to weaken regional development. I mean, it's a lot of nice talk meant to lull you into a feeling of goodwill, like getting into a warm bath. That's what it's supposed to be like. And again, I say it again, purity of intention, that is no indication of outcome. And we have become very susceptible to statements of purity of intention, because we believe it's only the purity of, or the lack of purity of intention that is preventing the natural state of prosperity and equitable fairness just distilling out of the atmosphere as it's supposed to do. No, utopia is not deliverable. Life is about trade-offs in an imperfect world. And I think that state of mind, that decadent state of mind, has been fed by the welfare state. Again, I think the welfare state is probably, and our reliance on it and our dependence, our psychological dependence as well as our material dependence, that is the villain of the piece here. I don't think Klaus Schwab is the villain of the piece. I think it is in us. Now, if you don't like this cobblers that he's coming out with, don't curse him, don't curse the WEF. We need to look to ourselves. We need to look to the politicians who will use it as a way as a sly way to govern us without accountability, with it, getting rid of the democratic accountability between elections. So accountability other than the voting nexus every 4 or 5 years disappears, which is what they want. We have to look at them and to decide, are we going to let them get away with this? They can get away with this because we have such high expectations of them. We believe they can and should and will do all these nice things for us. If we stop believing that, they won't be able to pull the wool over our eyes so much. They won't be able to get away with this so much like they did with the EU, but possibly worse with the WEF. Thank you.